I definitely want to jump into it and ask you a bunch about Whiskey Acres, but I I want to go back a little bit in kind of your story because we obviously know each other a little bit, and I think you're right about my age, maybe a year or two older than me, and you went to U of I, right? I mean, you're going to the U of I game today.
Yep.
And you studied, was it ag science or what did you study there?
Ag communications and advertising.
And advertising. Okay,
Yep.
cool.
So it was this cool sort of combination of this broad sort of indoctrination into all things ag science,
Yeah.
complemented with stuff in the College of Communications to help you learn how to talk about it, I guess.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I have a similar sort of combination of stuff that I studied. I was marketing and advertising, but then Illinois State had a huge insurance program. So I was insurance and marketing and advertising. And ironically, I ended up doing quite a bit with both of those. When you grew up and you had obviously a farming background, you come from several generations of farmers. Is that right?
Right. I can't remember whether you've been to the home farm or not, but I grew up, in country terms, as neighbors to Adam.
Yeah.
So I grew up in the house that my dad grew up in, which is across the street from the house that his dad grew up in, which is next door to the house that his dad grew up in.
Yeah.
And so I guess when I'm on the farm or back on the farm, that makes me fifth generation.
Yeah.
And to kind of answer your question of the how did I get here? What's the story? Is I grew up there in Sheldon and loved every minute of it and wouldn't trade it for the world. But the farm that my family has is big enough that my dad needs help, but not big enough that my dad needs a partner. And so it was, let's go off to college and see what we can come up with. And when I went to college, I quickly recognized that I was unique in the sense that I was one of the few people that actually understood the difference between a corn plant and a soybean plant. And, just some of the idiosyncrasies that go into modern agriculture, there's a big gap between what we do and what people think that we do. And so through my sort of college career, I did the aforementioned, curriculum. And one of my first jobs out of college, I actually traveled the Midwest on behalf of kind of a multinational agribusiness, teaching ag education in classrooms and doing presentations at community events, state fairs, things like that. And then my appreciation for the gap truly expanded there. And, you'd be surprised at how many people truly believe that chocolate milk comes from brown cows, or that the sign that you see on the edge of a cornfield that says Pioneer or DeKalb or Golden Harvest, people think that those are symbols of who owns the property, as opposed to advertising the type of plant or the type of genetics that are being grown there.
Yeah.
And so I did quite a bit of work, sort of helping to bridge that gap, but kind of always wanted to do something a little bit more concrete to help with that consumer experience. And, again, going back to my roots, I love them and never would trade that, but Sheldon, Illinois is not a place to, create a consumer experience. I graduated high school with 15 kids, and there's not a whole lot there, or not many people there. So to kind of continue my career, I eventually started working for, or as part of that, I worked for a corporate communications firm, and did work for another agribusiness company where I eventually became I left the PR firm, but eventually became a district sales manager for a seed brand, and was managing a territory kind of across northern Illinois. And in that, I met two guys who are father and son team who own a farm in DeKalb. They were customers of mine, became friends of mine. And to make a very, very long story short, they actually conceived the idea of opening a distillery, and kind of recognized that their bandwidth with the farm and the other things they were involved in wasn't enough to sort of execute it and manage it. And they knew my background and passion and asked if I wanted to become a partner. So I went home and had a very interesting conversation with my wife, because concurrently At that same time frame, I was actually entertaining some offers from some other companies, and was potentially going to become a big fish in a small pond at a company. And then the next day I went and had the conversation with Amanda and said, well, how about instead of doing that, let's cash out 401ks and start a distillery. And
and how did that conversation go?
you know, I mean, I'm doing it. And
Yeah.
to her credit, she said something along the lines of, well, you can do this and fail and always be able to go back to these jobs that you're turning down today.
Yeah.
Or you could do this and succeed and never have to work for somebody else again.
Yeah.
And, 10, 11 years later, I'm somewhere in between.
Sure.
We've made it work, but I wouldn't call what we've done, complete success yet. And that's nothing that we've done wrong. It's just a matter of this business that we're in takes time. You make whiskey today, and in many cases you're 6, 7, 8 years away until you sell it.
Yeah.
So we're just now starting to get into that point where we have mature product to scale that we can, look at it in terms of financial success. We've been very successful in terms of what we've made and the impact we've had on the industry so far.
Yeah. So those early days, was there a time where you thought that you might go and just sort of take over the family farm, or did you always kind of have I don't know if it's maybe the entrepreneurial kind of bug, or just you always kind of, did you know that you wanted to go and kind of pursue some other stuff?
I don't know that I ever knew what I wanted to do. Always willing to try everything.
Yeah.
As regard to the family farm, my dad is in his mid 60s, and I help him as much as I can. And when he decides to, that he can't do it anymore, I'll be the first one there to make sure the farm stays functioning. Can't and won't live there, but so as it relates to the farm, one thing that you can't raise cows from 100 miles away, but you can make day trips to raise crops, and I'll make sure that we always have that going on.
Yeah.
And so, I'm just blessed that I was able to, connect with these folks in DeKalb. Again, I often say that there's not a whole lot of difference in terms of productivity as it relates to the farmland, but there's a big difference in that, Sheldon is 50 miles south of Kankakee, whereas DeKalb is 20 miles west of Geneva. Yeah. and that's the biggest difference.
Yeah. Yeah. My family, actually, my grandpa was a farmer. He had, I'm not sure how much land, but corn and soybean. And I think when, years ago he had, livestock, and so that farm is still in our family. And I think his hope and dream was always that, one of his kids would take it over, or maybe grandkids. And so the family is still managing it, but kind of the same thing, managing it from from afar, and renting out the farmhouse and renting out the land. And so I'm always curious how that works with multiple generations of farmers. But it's awesome that your story sort of like veered off sort of slightly into this partnership with these the two other co-founders, or three, or what's the group look like?
Two other co-founders, Jim and Jamie Walter. They're father and son, both also U of I grads. One has a degree in Jim is the elder statesman of the organization. He's in his mid 70s. He's got a degree, like a true degree in agriculture, from Illinois, and his son Jamie actually had a degree in advertising from Illinois, and then got a degree in law from Drake. And so with sort of my marketing and sales background, a legal background, and sort of a mechanical and production background, we have very, very different ways of seeing and thinking about things. And that's, part of our success is that, we challenge each other and don't get stuck in groupthink. And it's part of what drives us crazy as well.
And what did the kind of the business plan look like when you guys had those first conversations? Because I imagine, the way that the business probably changed a lot in those first couple of years. I mean, because you talk about the big challenges, like to get a business like that off the ground, it takes time. And so I imagine those early days, you had a business plan, but I'm guessing you probably had to pivot a little bit here and there. And sort of like those first couple of years were probably a little chaotic, or am I wrong? Was it pretty straightforward? Just you had a plan and you had to go execute?
we had a plan and we had to go execute. Were there surprises and curveballs? Absolutely. One of the biggest challenges we had was actually, local government.
Mm-hmm.
At the federal and state level, there's a permit to open a distillery, and
Yep.
there's a fairly it's not simple, but it's straight. You know what you need to do.
Yeah.
But when we were opening up in the county, because we're in DeKalb County as opposed to the DeKalb city, we had a planning and zoning administrator that was hell bent on not wanting us to do this. He looked at opening a distillery as non-traditional agriculture, despite the fact that you go back 100 plus years ago, virtually every farm in the country had a distillery on it. So it's actually among the most traditional forms of agriculture or agriculture processing that you can have. So we had to fight some major challenges there, and in an effort to not get bogged down to that misery, I'll share one of the best and worst stories of this. So we had some success in navigating, this bureaucracy. And one of the things was that, he told us that we couldn't operate a distillery on the farm. And we made the case that raising grain and processing it into a milled product, cooking it, fermenting it, and distilling it, and the fermentation process is feeding sugar to yeast, is no different than raising hogs, feeding them corn, and making a pork chop. That it's you're feeding something and creating something.
Yeah.
And we won that argument and really pissed them off there. And so we kind of recognized that we were told, because at startup we were working with a guy named Dave Pickerel. Dave used to be the master distiller at Maker's Mark. He left Maker's in the mid to late 2000s to help knuckleheads like us transition from aspirational to functional distillers. And among the many things that he taught us and told us was that one of your keys to success is to have a consumer-facing space and what we would call a tasting room. And so in an effort to make things a little bit turnkey and reduce costs, there's actually a little, we call it a picnic shelter that's on the farm that was built 60 plus years ago by my business partner's brother. He used the original stone and timber from the dairy barn on the farmstead to create this space for his daughters to hang out. They had 4-H meetings, they'd camp out there, really cool space. And we kind of looked at that and said, all right, this is a place for us to start. It also fell under the county ordinance that we could, because you can't retail on a farm, but you can have a farm stand. So a farm stand can only be open at the time. It was something like April 1st through December 1st, could only sell what you grew or what you processed from what you grew, and only could be, I think, either 400 or 600 square feet. This building checked all those boxes. So we started, getting inventory, things to sell, and, started selling swag. Actually, just put it on our website. You can buy a hat, you buy a t-shirt or whatever. And we got a phone call from the administrator wanted to know whether we grew cotton, because if we didn't grow cotton, we couldn't be selling these hats and t-shirts. Subsequently got called into a several-hour meeting with the planning and zoning administrator as well as the state's attorney, where we went through essentially a fine-tooth comb of what we could and couldn't do. So deep into said if we were going to sell a whiskey and Coke, that we had to sell the whiskey and give away the Coke. And that if somebody wanted to come as a designated driver, that we could not sell them a Coke. We had to give it away.
Wow. So
fast forward, we got a 3-page letter, detailing these things and telling us that we were welcome to give things away. We just couldn't sell them. Welcome to America.
Yeah.
So what we did was we pivoted, and Jamie had this wonderful idea. Is we started selling kernels of corn, and we'd sell 3 kernels of corn for $5 a piece plus tax. If you bought that, you got a free T-shirt or free hat or whatever it was you would choose.
Yeah.
And this made headline news in the area. And subsequently, they went and changed the law to, deal with common sense. and so to get back to your question, as it relates to the business plan, at no point in our plan did we think that we were going to have to face that level of pushback for, no logical reason. And the mental, almost turmoil that pushed us through, and the time that took away from doing other important things was probably our single biggest unplanned curveball that we felt at startup. I don't want to say everything went perfectly from there, but we invested in the right people and the right hardware, and just we put a plan together that made sense for what we wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And in most forms and fashions, we stuck to it and continue to do so.
Yeah. Now, because you guys are do a great job of marketing, everything that you do is like seed to spirit. Explain what that is really quick. Like, did that help with all of this, or is that being able to, operate and find some of those loopholes, or was that just something that you had planned from the very beginning, that was what you guys wanted to build?
From day one, us opening a distillery was not about opening a distillery. It was about opening an extension of the farm.
Yep.
And so the seed to spirit tagline that we have truly exemplifies what we do in controlling the process from the seed we put in the ground to the spirit we put in the bottle. Anybody who can get a loan or is independently wealthy can go open up a distillery, and a lot have.
Oh, yeah.
I don't remember the exact number, but we opened in 2013. There was less than 1,000 distilleries. Today, there's over 3,500, and so a lot have. Yeah. But in today's world, in the United States, don't quote me on this number, but there's probably less than 15 or so like legitimate farm distilleries, and we think that's important from a consumer standpoint, as people want to know where their food and beverage comes from, who it comes from, and be able to experience what that product went through as it was made.
Yeah. Because I think the average person probably doesn't understand completely, like with like a winery, like an estate winery is where everything is happening there, and the entire process beginning to end is different than some wineries where they're sourcing a lot of grapes or whatever. And so distilleries, I would imagine, are the same, right? I mean, there's not a lot of distilleries out there that can say they have the complete, process, in control, like you guys do, right?
There's very few that can say that, and you'd actually be surprised, and many consumers would be as well, is that there's lots of labels that you'll see on the shelf that are made by what we call NDPs, non-distiller producers. So they are people who bought whiskey from somebody else and created their own label.
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing wrong with that, but completely opposite of what we wanted to do at Whiskey Acres.
Yeah. Now, when you were just starting, what year was this roughly? This was...
I think that the wife conversation happened in something like 2011.
Okay.
We spent maybe it was early 2012, and then we spent 2012 and into 2013 doing the business plan and kind of validating what we were doing. We brought in Dave Pickerel as a consultant, and then Whiskey Acres on paper came to existence in 2013.
Okay.
And then from 2013 till actually December 21st of 2014, we got our permitting, we got our equipment, and we started distilling on December 21st of 2014. So we've been making whiskey for 10 years and spending money on it for about 12.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the part that I find so interesting is what you talked about, earlier, is that I think the average whiskey, it takes how many years on average? Is it 5 years, 4, 5, 6? It's probably a mix, right?
The youngest that we sell today is 4, and the oldest has 8-year-old barrels in it.
Okay. So in those early days, was it just, what did the business look like for anything like consumer facing? I mean, you had like, some of the merch, you had some of I imagine the tasting room kind of was set up relatively early, right?
Tasting room was set up early. And, you could come and you could drink white whiskey, vodka, some, simple cocktails that weren't, didn't feature any aged spirit.
Yeah.
And essentially what the tasting room allowed us to do is during those months that we were open, the tasting room covered the cost of operation during those 6 months we were open.
Yep.
And so that made it really nice to not have capital calls.
Yeah.
Because it's what I think a lot of people don't recognize is, particularly with the distillery, is you spend a pile of money to get the tanks and the fermenters and all the things you need to actually make the whiskey.
Yeah.
And then you've got to buy the grain and the barrels and the labor and the yeast and the enzymes and all this kind of stuff to make it every day. And so, if I'm selling a barrel that's 8 years old, that dollar was spent on it 8 years ago. And every day, we don't make it today, we don't sell it down the road. And so, we survived that. We didn't quit our day jobs. I continued to run a seed business. I worked on the farm, we didn't hire any employees other than my business partner's wife. She worked as she continues to work as our finance and compliance manager, but we did it all. And, for the first couple of years, it wasn't uncommon to be putting in 80 to 100-hour weeks.
Yeah.
And it was fun and it was exhausting.
Those early years, did you have specific moments that you remember where you're like, gosh, is this gonna work? I mean, putting in all these hours, working the day job, putting all that work and effort on. Because I feel like any business, you could be a solo, marketing consultant like I am, and like those early years are like they can be kind of scary where you're like, I don't know if this is going to work. Did you have moments where you thought about that?
Never questioned whether it was going to work. Certainly took steps back and can we continue this pace?
Yeah.
I got my Facebook memory the other day was, on January 1st of 2015, I was in the distillery cooking mashes. We walked out the door of our house at 5 o'clock in the morning and went out there and worked all day long. And, was it fun? Was I glad I did it? Absolutely. But certainly had those moments where I recognized that sort of pace of investment of time and soul, so to speak, was unsustainable to do it for the duration of the business, so to speak. But yeah, it was absolutely necessary to do it at startup and beyond.
Yeah. Yeah. And I obviously have a marketing background. You do as well. Like in those early years when you had, folks coming out to the property and the tasting room, and you were, I imagine, working at such a fast pace, did you find time to kind of slow down and like really focus on like the customer, the consumer, what they wanted, how you wanted to like build, because I want to get into like building the brand and everything that you guys have today, which is like any brand, it's the time in those early years, like talking to people, learning, figuring out what you wanted to build, because that happens slowly. Like, did you guys find time to do that during those years?
Well, as it relates to consumer, one of the things that I think tells the best story about how to relate to our customers, if you look at our staff. I don't know the exact number, but I would say that roughly 70% of our team started out as customers. And that's because they had a great experience. When we opened the visitor center, or our tasting room, I should say, it was Jim, Jamie, and me, and we had two other employees that we brought on board, and we worked alongside them, for a couple of years, and so they became more like family than employees. And then as we recognized that there were other things that needed to be done than us being on site, selling and interacting all the time, we began bringing people on board, and most of those people were customers. Another thing that we did is we have a bottling line that's all done by hand. You fill 4 bottles at a time, and you pass it to somebody, and they put a cork on it, and they pass it to somebody, and they put a stamp on it, and they shrink it and put it in a box. And we approach that by having bottling parties. So we post something on Facebook, and we say, hey, on Tuesday at 10 o'clock, we need 10 volunteers to come in and help us. And we have essentially a waiting list, probably hundreds long, of people who want to do that.
Wow.
And those people become incredible brand advocates. Some of them become employees. Most of them become friends. And when they leave, they become, the best tellers of our story and carry the pail of what we're doing.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. And when it comes to, storytelling and, when I talk to anybody in marketing or even outside of marketing, that can feel like kind of I don't know. It always feels like a little bit of like a cliche thing. People throw it around a lot, storytelling, but really great brands, I mean, they have that. And I imagine, working that closely with your customers to the point where they become employees and partners and advocates, and they essentially, like every great brand, they almost feel like they are part of the brand. What was did you guys consciously like think about, hey, what is our story that we're trying to tell, or was it just a focus on a dedication to like the mission, and you kind of go heads down, and that kind of becomes the brand? What, like, did you guys think about that in those years?
Yeah, but it's beautiful in that they're kind of the same thing. You talk
Yeah.
about the story and the mission. We are farmers that make whiskey from grain that we grow.
Yeah.
That's it. I mean, it's that simple. And the storytelling process is, let's pick out pieces of that process and share what we do. And so that story sometimes looks like, our master distiller Rob filling barrels, or making samples. Other times it looks like one of us, in a tractor, or my business partner in the combine, harvesting the feedstock that will become, whiskey. And so the beauty of what we do is that, it's nonfiction, right? We talk about, our story is facts, and that makes it an easy story to tell, and it's highly relatable, and people truly enjoy that, the visuals and the tastes and the smells and all those kind of things.
And I forgot to ask, but before all of this, were you a whiskey guy? Were you like, I imagine now you're fully always willing to kind of nerd out on whiskey, but like, did you always have that, or was that something that kind of grew on you?
No, like a couple years before we started the distillery, actually, back in my PR days, we used to do like a First Friday thing throughout the office, and we'd do a couple hours at the end of the day where different offices would host something. And somebody in the office, actually, he hosted a whiskey tasting where I think he had a bottle of Maker's Mark, bottle of Jack Daniels, an Irish whiskey, and a Scotch. I can't remember what they were, but he talked about how they're all different. They're all whiskeys, but why they're different, and the process that goes into it. And before that, I never had even considered, really drinking anything besides a Jack and Coke or something like that.
Yeah.
And so from that moment on, it really wasn't driving my, I didn't leave that sort of experience to go, I want to open a distillery. Yeah. But I actually did. I kind of a side story here is in that same sort of time in my life, Amanda, my wife, and I were living in Chicago, and we got invited to, I think it was something put on by, I think it was the city of Nashville. They were trying to recruit like young talent. And I think I met somebody from Brown-Forman, and I sent a letter off, hoping that I could work with them, and never got anything back. Well, fast forward a couple of years later, and I'm not going to be able to find it right now, but a couple of years later, I was at Jack Daniels. We had already, Whiskey Acres was incorporated, so it was a real thing. And we were on a tour, standing right outside of the cave where the water flows out that Jack Daniels says they use to make the whiskey. And I was standing right in front of the Jack Daniels statue and listened to the tour guide. And then all of a sudden, wham, a rock tumbles from the top of the cave and lands right in between my feet. Missed my head by centimeters.
Oh, man.
And somewhere in my office there, I have that rock. But I had that sort of moment where I thought, Jack Daniels is trying to kill me. That means I must be on the right path to doing something cool and special. And so, a little bit of a tangent, but I feel like that moment is one that I sort of remember most clearly of like, this is the right thing to do.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny. So did you have, obviously over time you sort of start, drinking more whiskeys, trying whiskeys, understanding more about the distilling process and all the varieties. Were there other, like purely from like a brand perspective, were there other brands that you kind of were inspired by, whether it be in, anywhere in the industry, or I don't know, even outside the industry, that you guys sort of pulled from or found inspiration from?
You brought it up earlier. I wouldn't necessarily say a brand, but as much as an industry. And the industry is what I would call the estate wineries.
Yeah.
Where you go and visit one of those and you drink a glass of this wine and a glass of that wine. They taste differently because this one is made from a particular varietal, is grown at a different location or a particular location. This one tastes differently because it's made with a different varietal at a different location. And that is the foundation for what we do. It's less about location. We're learning more about the terroir standpoint of what acre and how a given acre affects, the final flavor profile. But what we've done is be very specific about looking at how types of grain varietals affect the final flavor of the product. So, it's common knowledge that a Pinot grape makes a different flavor of wine than a Cab grape. But most people don't think about corn having multiple varietals. And with our background in farming and our background in the seed industry, we know that's not the case at all. And so as we have, grown into what we are today, we've had to sort of look at the seed selection differently, because as a farmer, you make a living by selecting a seed variety that you think is going to grow the most, and then marketing it on the market to sell it at the highest price.
Yeah.
And so when you're doing that, we often say that cows don't tell you how corn tastes, right? If you give them corn, they're going to eat it, right? Fuel ethanol, which is one of the biggest consumers of corn, doesn't really care what corn tastes like. And so we've had to take our farmer hat off and put on a distiller hat and recognize that instead of looking at corn varieties from a volume standpoint of what can grow the most, we'll look at it from a standpoint of what tastes the best.
Yeah.
And in some cases, they're the same. We can find ones that are high yielding and also very good for distilling. And we've taken that so far as I mentioned this earlier, for the first 2 years, we did everything. We distilled, we farmed, you name it, it was us. And we quickly recognized that that was unsustainable. And we brought in a fellow by the name of Rob Wallace, he's pushing 8 or 9 years with us now. I spent 6-8 weeks with him, kind of attached at the hip, teaching him our standard operating procedures and sort of, here's how you do it, and eventually turned the keys over to him. And kind of right away, he began not necessarily challenging things, but say, hey, why don't we try this? Why don't we try that? And as long as they made sense, we enabled his creativity and exploration. After a few months, he came to us and asked whether we would support him going to Heriot-Watt University out of Edinburgh, Scotland, where he eventually earned his master's degree in distillation and fermentation sciences, and he wrote his master's thesis on how varietals of corn affect the flavor of whiskey. And so he took what we as farmers, really looked at it very anecdotally, and he looks at it very scientifically. Yeah. And in many cases, our intuition aligns with his science, and in some cases they don't. And we make adjustments and production changes based off of the science now. Yeah, and it's a really, really cool way to go about it.
Yeah, that's cool. It feels like it's part science, part art, part almost even religion, just like sort of creating something amazing from the land and marketing it. And so when you started distilling, I think you said like 2014, at what point in time did you guys get to a level where you're like, okay, we have sort of like the next phase, which is, okay, we've got to sort of expand our reach, our footprint. At what point did you sort of start expanding to, I don't know, finding partners or retail opportunities, throughout the state beyond just sort of like local? Like when did it start to kind of blow up, or is that not how it happened? Was it just real gradual?
I don't know that I would ever use the word blow up to describe what we've done.
Yeah.
From day one, we've looked at having experienced partners as part of our business. And, so that includes finding the right distribution partners.
Yeah.
Also include, within the first 6 months of us distilling, we had a 30, 40, 50 person team from Binny's in the distillery for a full tour, tasting, and just sort of an unveiling of our vision.
Yeah.
And so, that partnership that we started 10, 11 years ago has certainly paid dividends, and that, what we were talking about was what we are doing and what it will make, not what we are doing, what we have today.
Yeah.
And so really making sure that we share the vision. And that's been a key piece of our success. And then, also just being truthful and transparent about what we do. And there's lots of shortcuts you can take in whiskey. And we haven't taken the bait and done any of those.
Yeah.
And that, having integrity in the industry is absolutely necessary, and something that we're proud that we've maintained.
Yeah. And Binny's, I think, is where I obviously see your guys' stuff the most, but I know you have available all sorts of other places. When you were kind of going through that process of I imagine having kind of like a plan and a roadmap of how you guys wanted to grow, and like not taking those shortcuts, but like having kind of a roadmap. What were the big marketing challenges that you guys had? I mean, obviously you had the vision, you had the story, you had a pretty clear idea of how you wanted to connect with people. But what was the challenge for you guys at that point? Was it just getting access to the right people? Was it reaching more of the industry people? Was it more the B2B aspect to all of it? Was the consumer side, or is it like a little bit of everything maybe?
The single biggest challenging in operating a distillery is the distribution portion of it.
Yeah.
So to oversimplify it, essentially you can be a manufacturer, you can be a distributor, or you can be a retailer. And you can't really operate in more than one of those spaces. That's oversimplifying it, but just for volume's sake, we have to make it, we have to sell it to a distributor, they have to sell it to a retailer.
Yeah.
And so one of the biggest challenges is getting distribution buy-in. And that, you've got a sales force, depending on who you're working with, of, 20 to 200 people who are the representative of your brand to the retailers. And how do you get their attention? And, quite frankly, it's very difficult to get their attention when they've never heard of you, or they've only heard of you a couple times. The retailer has never heard of you. The final customer hasn't heard of you. Yeah. And you're competing with things that in some cases we may be a little bit more expensive. We have less brand equity. And so getting that sort of a multi-tier buy-in to what we're doing. And, physically what we often do is, we sell it to the distributor, and then we help the distributor sell it to the retailer. And then we host tastings at the retailer's place to help them sell to the consumer. So we're involved in every step of that sales process, but only get paid once.
Yep.
We as the manufacturer actually make the least amount of money off the product than every other tier that touches it. So if you call that process marketing, that is the single biggest challenge of marketing as it relates to a distillery.
Yeah.
In terms of showcasing our brand, I don't want to say that it was easy, but it was among the easier things that we've done for a couple of reasons. One is our story. Our story is a fun one to tell. And then two, just we're blessed with my wife, and my background was in PR. And so we recognize that, having those relationships with writers and reporters, getting them to our space, sharing and telling that story, will allow them to share and tell that story. And I don't know within the first 2 years of our startup, maybe 3 years, we were on the cover of the food section, the food leisure section of the Tribune, of the Sun Times. We've been in the Wall Street Journal, Midwest Living, featured in the Illinois Tourism Guide. So we really kind of made sure that we told the story to the places that were relevant, and they did a wonderful job of telling that story to our consumers.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's some of the clients that I've worked with in the past, to me, that is one of the most fun and interesting challenges when it's, it is, like you said, it is technically marketing, but it's not, really marketing in the traditional sense, where it's not as simple as like, let's, build a brand and tell our story and get it out there and see how much product we can sell. It's a much more complicated, process where there's all sorts of different audiences, and each audience, might need to have a slightly different, exposure to the brand, and each audience maybe cares about, different things when it comes to, what role that they play in the ecosystem. And so when there's one, company or, everyone pulling together, but there's so many different pieces of quote unquote marketing that have to kind of work together. And like you said, there's probably, I'm guessing there's, dozens, if not hundreds of companies that just like, that's such a complicated sort of process to navigate that, at some point it just doesn't work if you're not, getting all those different pieces, the puzzle pieces to kind of fit together. Well,
it's particularly challenging, in those first few years of, again, we're talking about what we're doing, not what we're selling.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Hey, here's what we're doing today. And, call us back in about 5 years and we'll have something for you to drink.
Yeah.
And hopefully buy.
Yeah. What were some of do you remember like really specific initiatives that you guys had when you were, anything that you guys did to get on the right people's radar or get a meeting or, like you said, you brought out, all the folks from, Binny's, that's one example, but there's all the other just, distribution parts of the process. Did you guys have specific initiatives that, in hindsight, you kind of look back and go, oh, wow, is a really good thing we handled it that way because that really worked?
I can tell you a failure.
Well, that's helpful too.
that wasn't necessarily our fault, but
yeah.
There's a particular line of products in bourbon that's called Bottle and Bond, and Bottle and Bond bourbon has to be at least 4 years old, has to be bottled at 100 proof, and needs to be made at the same distillery by the same distiller in the same distilling season. It's a fairly common product line for the big distillers to have. It's a fairly unique thing for small distilleries like us to have something in any volume whatsoever that checks all those boxes and to have it in quantity. We were patient enough to do all that. And in April of 2020, we had roughly 50 different launch events scheduled to showcase our bonded products throughout the state.
Yeah.
Binny's events, Delilah's in Chicago, you name every major whiskey location, we had it planned to do, and we did none of them. You remember what happened in April of 20?
Well, now that you remind me, it was 2020. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
We did zero.
Yeah.
And so we went from this, very well planned, methodical, launch where we were going to be, working with our key distribution partners, be utilizing, the most prestigious and well-known retail and restaurant bar outlets of spirits in front of consumers who care, to having, all of that canceled.
Yeah.
And, during that little stint, we switched our time and talents to making hand sanitizer and, certainly we did it because it was the right thing to do, but in that process certainly made some headlines there as well.
Yeah. That's a cool story. I remember, some of, mutual friends sort of sending me links and articles of like, hey, did you hear, this cool story? So tell me how that came together really quick. I mean, you made that decision, like you said, to start producing hand sanitizer. Because it's funny when you think back how incredibly, in demand that was. I mean, you could not find hand sanitizer anywhere. So at what point did you guys, come to that, realization that you could help?
Well, this will be a little bit more than a real quick story.
Yeah.
This is kind of, so.
Well, it's a good one. So, yeah.
Among the other sort of, challenges, failures we had is my business partner and I went to Nebraska I think it was March 11th of 2020 to launch a new partnership with our distributor out there. Went and saw key accounts, had a sales meeting with their staff. But on the way out, we had a conference call with our management team, and said, what's your guys' comfort level? We're hearing all this stuff about this COVID thing. Do you feel like do you want us to close this weekend? What do you want to do? And our team was like, we're in it. We are, let's business as usual. Thank you for having the conversation, but don't change the way we do business because of this. I think the next day, if I remember right, there was like an NBA or an NCAA game that like got canceled at halftime.
Yeah.
And that's when we kind of went, oh hell, this is something. Mm-hmm. So on the way back from our, really long drive from Omaha, we had lots of conversations about, well, it's hand sanitizer, something that we should look into. With having the alcohol that we make, it's easy, but living in the country we live in, the bureaucracy behind it makes it not easy.
Yeah.
And so we did not have the appropriate licensing to make hand sanitizer. So we kind of put it in the back of our minds, but of something that would be good to do, but we can't. Fast forward a week or so down the road from there, there were at the federal level, they made some changes to allow distilleries to utilize their alcohol to make sanitizer, but they came out with, you have to denature it. So that's a fancy word for saying make it taste really bad so people don't drink it.
Okay.
And so what the secret ingredients for hand sanitizer, as we were legally able to make it, are high proof alcohol, glycerin to make it stick, hydrogen peroxide, and then they wanted to put 2 denaturants in it. One of them is called Bitrex. It's the most bitter compound known to man. You buy it in little bricks. Something like 2 teaspoons can denature 240 gallons of alcohol. There's this other one, I don't remember what it's called, but you buy that in semi-tanker loads, and 5,000 gallons, but you use similarly small quantities. We could not afford nor store a semi-tanker of compound number 2. And so essentially put all of us out of the sanitizer business. But we made a phone call to our congressman. It was Adam Kinzinger at the time, and we explained to him the challenges that we were facing. The next morning, I woke up to several phone calls telling me to turn on Fox News because he was on there talking about the challenges that bureaucracy is stopping people like us from being able to make. That afternoon, Kinzinger was in Mike Pence's office with, I think, the director of the FDA, explaining what the challenges were. That evening, they changed the administrative perspective and said you only use one of these. Mm-hmm. So we got the go to do this. So we started getting this stuff. Or I think we basically hit send to order the appropriate things. The next morning, Ivanka Trump is tweeting about us. And that afternoon, we get a phone call from somebody, the president of United Labs, calling to buy hand sanitizer on behalf of the Secret Service. So you want to talk about this like 24-hour or 36-hour time frame of just like, holy hell, what did we get ourselves into? That was it. And then for the next 6 weeks, every ounce of hand sanitizer we could make, we did, and pre-sold. So if you called me and said you wanted it, you paid me for it, and you got it on my schedule, and we delivered it to you. I'm very proud of when we did this. We essentially sold it at our cost plus staff time, and so we made and sold quite a bit of it, but didn't profiteer off of it.
Yeah. And
as a result, you asked about customers earlier. Probably once a week still, we get people coming to us talking about how thankful they are that we were doing it in the way that we did. I have peers in the industry who were selling it for 2 to 3x of what we were. They made money off of it.
Yeah.
And I'd love to have those dollars, but I sleep well at night knowing that we did the right thing.
Yeah. Wow. And how long, you said it was, how many weeks that you guys
6
were doing
weeks.
it?
It was the fastest growing and crashing business that you could ever write a case study on, because basically what we did in 2 days, it took the big guys to do. It took them 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And then even though that we were selling this stuff at essentially our cost, our cost was still more expensive than what the big guys were able to do.
Yeah. Wow.
And not only did they have, the ability to do it at a lower cost, but they had a much stronger distribution network and all those things. So
Yeah.
luckily we weren't stuck with too much of it.
Yeah. Wow. So 6 weeks of that. And then, obviously the challenges of COVID extend far beyond that. What was that? That was such a weird time. It's almost hard to, think back that full year of 2020. What did that look like for you guys? I mean, obviously the tasting room visitor center, I imagine completely shut down, or what did that look like?
Well, earlier in our conversation, you asked at any point did I ever, wonder about whether this was the right thing to do. Roughly, May 1st of 2020.
Yeah.
I would say that's when I had that. What the hell did I get myself into? And how are we going to get out of this? And it had nothing to do with the business, but as much as the environment. We continued. We sort of continued to take the long look, and we had 2 distillers at the time. We dedicated one distiller to hand sanitizer production, and the other distiller to continue making spirits for us, because we knew if we didn't make it then, we weren't going to be selling it now.
Yeah.
And then our tasting room and visitor center, we opened a brand new visitor center in January of 2019, and then closed that visitor center in March of 20. So, that was a tough few months.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember. I think we reopened in maybe late June, something like that. I think we still have stickers of, "Here, customer, you can stand here, and your other one 6 feet away, you can stand over there." But the bright side of that is it forced us to look at what our resources were, and our resources at Whiskey Acres are land. And so we took what we used to call, a yard, and turned that into a whiskey garden. And so, we strung outdoor cocktail lights and spent tens of thousands of dollars on patio furniture, built a new patio or paver patio, and now have the ability to seat 250, 300 people outside. And that was, I think, a very welcome refuge for a lot of people during COVID, when we were able to actually open for them.
Yeah, I can imagine. I was living in the city, and it was less, obviously less space in the city, but anybody that had a parking lot, anybody that had a sidewalk, anywhere people were trying to get like outdoor space. So I imagine, that was probably pretty great for employees and local patrons and people that knew you guys. Now, I guess fast forwarding a little bit later, do you guys use the outdoor space quite a bit still? Do you do like events and things like that?
Yep. Yeah, we do. We have outside, when the weather is in season, outside table service. We do live music out there in the spring, summer, and fall. We'll do concerts, comedy shows, things like that. What we learned from those COVID months, we apply daily now.
Yeah. How long, because I'm always interested in this, how long did the COVID sting last for you guys? I mean, was it a kind of that first full year or a year and a half where we're sort of navigating, like, what do you do with the space that you have, and how do you have customers and employees, and like, how long did it take? Like, I don't think anybody really got back to normal. Like, everyone just slowly got settled into kind of the new normal. But like, how long did you guys feel that?
I don't remember. Dude, I will tell you, directly related to COVID, but not necessarily related to the consumer experience that we put together at our visitor center. COVID changed the way people consume alcohol. And when I say that, if you look at, call that March, April of 2020, a significant portion of alcohol was sold at bars and restaurants.
Yeah.
And then you give that, the several months after March of 2020, virtually no alcohol was sold at bars and restaurants.
Yeah.
And it was transitioned to what we call off premise, where you go to the liquor store and you buy it and take it home. that was great for the whiskey industry because, it created, bourbon became the baseball cards of the 90s is kind of how I would describe it.
Yeah.
People would, seek out things that they didn't think they could get, they'd show them off, they'd share them. And so what that did that we're actually kind of suffering from today. And when I say we, I mean the collective industry, is that there was, whiskey hunting and collecting was such a prominent thing to do that's kind of started in COVID and kind of continued that if, you go to your friend's house and kind of look at their bars today and compare that to, January 7th or 8th or whatever it is of 2018 or 2019, I bet there's a factor of 10 or 20x more bottles than they had back then.
Yeah.
And so it was really good for a stint in that people sort of bought bourbon with reckless abandon with money that they were given, for free. And now the money is dried up and the shelf space in home bars has filled up. And so we're having to adapt of who we target and and not necessarily what we're selling, but we sort of saw this coming as well in that, I mentioned earlier, the distilling world went from 500 distilleries in 2020 or 2013 to 3,000 plus today. And in an effort to not sell commodity bourbon and be competitive, we created things that nobody else could do. And that goes back to the farm. So we make bourbon from things like blue popcorn. So it's this really special variety of corn that you can pop and go watch a movie, or in our case, we grow it and distill it into blue popcorn bourbon. We have a series of other things along those lines that, because of the farm, nobody else has. And so we were fortunate enough to have that forethought back then, that today we're selling things that are still sought after because they're not a part of this sort of crowded whiskey market that's highly commoditized.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there any of those, opportunities for you guys to kind of stand out, or the new products, the sort of experimental stuff? What are the kind of things that you are really excited about today? Or maybe it's more of like the industry stuff too. Is like there a trend in the industry that you guys are excited about that maybe already invested in, or that you guys are maybe a little bit ahead of the curve?
Well, we try to not look at things as necessarily a trend in the industry, is because, trend is a trend, and because the tail on what we do is so long. So we look at kind of what our moat is and what differentiates us. And again, that goes back to the farm. And so we've invested heavily in creating these artisan series products that are made from these specialty corns. But even that, we look at, all right, we do this today, but what's stopping somebody else from copying this? And so we've gone so far as to breed our own proprietary variety of corn for making bourbon. And so just to give you a little details on that, we took an open pollinated yellow dent corn that was used for distillation during Prohibition in Minnesota. And we cross-pollinated that with an open pollinated red flint corn that comes from Tuscany, Italy. And it's used for making polenta because it's so very flavorful. And we crossbred those. We crossed them to create a new genetic line, essentially. But the Italian corn is very, very poor agronomics, and when you grow it here, it falls over. So by crossing it with the Minnesota corn, we capitalize on the good agronomics that corn has, the flavor profile it has, but also add some really, really robust flavor from the Italian corn. I think we did our first cross of that in 2019. And as I look forward, I think we're about a year away from being able to come to market with that. And so that, it's a long tail on that dog.
Yeah.
But again, it kind of falls in the category of something that we invested in back then that will come to life when there's a crowded commodity whiskey world, and we won't be competing there. We'll be competing with something that's nobody else has.
Yeah, I mean, it's like something I talk to clients about a ton. When it comes to marketing, like competitive, analysis and kind of looking at what other people in the industry are doing or competitors. I think in most examples, if you're, looking at a competitor and you're looking at their website or you're looking at their products and you're trying to make decisions based off that, I mean, you are already behind because that company, even in, really fast moving industries, I mean, what you're looking at is something that they worked on probably 6 months ago or a year ago. In your guys' case, it's probably even more extreme. So that's probably the other benefit of like you said earlier, just kind of having the mission and sort of keeping your head down and sticking to executing on that mission, and some of the other stuff you don't have to probably worry about as much. To pay attention to the customers and follow the path that you guys have been on for a while.
Give them something they want they can't have anywhere else.
Yeah, yeah. Can you think of any? I'm trying to think of the way to ask this question. Can you think of any, specific examples of maybe customers or industry people or something that has happened along the way where just like a really cool story about something that sort of speaks to what you just said. Give the customer something that they can't get anywhere else. Show them the love and the passion and everything that you guys put into what you do. Like, can you think of examples or stories where you heard something really cool from a customer or somebody in the industry that just really stands out to you, that kind of gives you, fuel to kind of continue on with the mission?
Well, this answer is going to be filled with recency bias, but there's a person in the whiskey world by the name of Fred Minnick, and he's written several books on whiskey, and he tastes everything, and has a pretty significant following nationally, internationally, and I would say it's probably one of the most influential whiskey influencers. And he puts out an annual list of the top 100 whiskeys in the world. And we just had our 7-year make that list. And we're one of I think there might have been like 4 or 5 other distilleries that I would call like a craft distillery that was included in that, as opposed to the rest were ones that either are source whiskey, like I talked about earlier, or institutional distilleries that have been around for 70 plus years. And to be part of that conversation at this short of a time is just extraordinarily validating to what we do. And to me, it's just the beginning of what we're going to offer.
That's awesome. Yeah, even before I knew that we were talking, I kind of have gone down the YouTube rabbit hole of whiskey channels and people doing whiskey tastings, and there are, better than anybody, there are so many of them, and I think over the past couple of years in every industry there, you go down the YouTube rabbit hole and you are seeing influencers and content creators, and like you said, whiskey is this kind of product area industry sort of kind of explosion over the past couple of years. How much of that are people coming to you guys to sample what you guys offer? Do you ever reach out to them? How does that work, or do you just kind of let people discover you when it makes sense? Because I've seen you guys pop up quite a bit here and there on different people's channels, and I imagine all the above, yeah,
particularly at rewind a few years ago, we were being discovered.
Yeah.
We also took the time to identify some key influencers to send samples to.
Yeah.
And then concurrently, we have this wonderful person on our team by the name of Julia, who started out as a customer, who started out as a bottling volunteer, who now is our bottling line manager. And she, just because she has fun, reaches out to these folks. And this fall hosted a YouTuber influencer meetup at Whiskey Acres. I don't remember the number, but there are 4, 5, or 6 YouTubers that came out and got a private tour and really just kind of indoctrinated into what we do and why we do it. And so we certainly are taking the next step to be more mindful of who those folks are and to engage with them. But at the same time, to maybe answer one of your earlier questions about things that are flattering. When I see a YouTuber that's talking about us because one of our customers liked us so much, they sent them a bottle. That customer paid for something and sent them to somebody else, and then they talk about it. We've never paid for a YouTube. You can pay good money and get great press out of it.
Oh yeah, yeah.
We have a PR department. We don't have an advertising department. and when I see people who organically are picking things up and talking positively about it without our intervention or influence in any way, shape, or form, just absolutely humbling and flattering.
Yeah.
Very thankful about it.
Yeah, and that's probably, I think people can tell when it's authentic and when it's something that was paid to be placed somewhere. I mean, I think people can kind of tell, which is good for the people who are doing it the right way.
Plus, I don't have a budget to pay, so
yeah. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. I know you're going to be hitting the road here in a little bit, but I wanted to ask you if you had to give somebody some advice on building a business. It doesn't have to be in your guys' space, but just in general, over the years, some of the lessons you've learned. What would be the advice you'd give to somebody trying to build a business or a brand?
Initially, top of mind, a couple things. One is, I would say, surround yourself with people who aren't like you, who think differently, who have a different approach. They'll teach you something, you'll teach them something, and it prevents you from getting that groupthink and going down a path that, an unchallenged, an easy path is often the wrong path. And by having folks who will challenge you on that, it certainly makes the decisions you make harder, but also makes them more meaningful. I'd also say be truthful and transparent about anything you do, say, or write. People and the internet don't forget. So if you are cooking something up that is going to come back to bite you, quit cooking. Get out of the kitchen and start over. Take the long look. This may be something that's ultra specific to what we do, but you need to survive today to get to tomorrow. But if you don't have something that's successful to get you to tomorrow, there's not going to be a day two. And so I said it earlier, there's an incredible amount of shortcuts you could take that we could have taken in the whiskey world, and certainly looked at them as ways to make a quick buck, to survive, to whatever. And we chose not to do those. And today I'm thankful for that, because it allows us to sell and share things without caveats, and to stand by what we do and why we do it.
Yeah, good advice. Last question, and I think I know, maybe I know the answer based on where you're getting in the car and driving to, but what does Nick Nagele do when he's not working? What does he do to relax?
Top of the list, relax or have fun, because they're two very different things.
Ooh, that's true. Let's do either one or both.
So my highlight reel of a perfect set of activities are spending time with my kiddos. I have 7-year-old twins who are just the funniest little dudes. I have a boy, Everly and Gunner, and they make me laugh. They bring me joy. They make me want to work. They make me want to play. And I'm blessed with every minute I get with them. However, I have to escape them sometimes. and one of my favorite things to do is golf. I love to golf. I love to be in a tractor. I love to go down and help my dad, get harvest in, get spring crops planted. There's probably nothing that's more therapeutic for me than getting in a tractor and knowing where the field starts and where the field ends and how long it's going to take to get there. Because in my life and my job, there's no end. There's always a churn. And so the seasonality and finality of the farming part of my life, I love and crave. There's nothing better than a night out with my wife, a nice dinner, and we'd love to go to places who support us. And so, part of the fun of what we do is we'll go to a nice place in the suburbs and sit down and, just be the two of us. And it doesn't take long for it to be a lot of other people that we know, just because of the reach of our business. And we find that to be just so fun and so flattering and humbling. And I love a good Illinois basketball team. I love the Cubs, and there's nothing better than having a half an hour of just quiet time with a remote control and YouTube, and to just smush my brain with some BS that I don't need. But that's a part of the package, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's a good list. I have 2 kids as well, 5 and 3, a little bit younger.
You're in the trenches.
I'm in the trenches, and I love golf as well. So maybe when it's not 8 degrees outside, maybe we could get in 18 sometime.
Fun fact: in my house last night, I pulled 2 teeth from 2 different kids.
Oh, geez.
The same front tooth on each kid got pulled yesterday.
Wow, so they do everything at the same time.
It's so funny.
All right, well, good luck with that. Appreciate the time, and I guess go Illini. You're hopping in the car to go see him now. All right. Thanks, Nick. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan.
All right, bye-bye.